All right, my fellow AP Literature and Composition teachers. So let's close out the 2021 AP exam by looking at FRQ3 houses. So ultimately, this is what I want to happen. Like if I'm doing my job well, there'll be a big eureka moment at the end of this video, and you'll say, holy cow, this guy's not joking. You seriously can use these templates across all of the expository modes. This whole exam can be written with 2 templates. That's all you need. So what we were talking about in FRQ1 and FRQ2 in the previous 2 videos with regards to the declarative and the inverted thesis, and the body paragraphs we tackled syllogistically. We're going to be talking about the same old stuff, and that's the beauty of these templates, is that it completely demystifies the writing process for students. We begin our academic year in early September, so come time for the exam in May, my students can do this habitually, instinctually, intuitively. They don't have to think about the writing, which is really cool. So in an exam like this, it comes down to their ability to ascertain a text accurately. So they're at the mercy of the poem and the shorter passage, and the writing pretty much takes care of itself. So let's dive right in. Here's the prompt, just to review. In many works of fiction, houses take on symbolic importance. Such houses may be literal houses or unconventional ones, like hotels, monasteries, or boats. Either from your own reading or from the list below, choose a work of fiction in which a literal or unconventional house serves as a significant symbol. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how this house contributes to an interpretation of the work as a whole. Do not merely summarize the plot. So my kids were pretty prepared for this. We did a number of texts that would work well for this. Death of a Salesman comes off the top of my head. Even Life of Pi, it gives, the example of the boat. And we do fences, so you'll see my students writing about a few of those texts. So let's dive right in. Ultimately, as you've seen in my other videos, students have 2 options to get anchored in a thesis. They can declare or they can invert. But here's the kicker, right? Same thing as FRQ1 and FRQ2. They can always invert the thesis. So for all 3 FRQs, they can invert. So let's unpack what I mean by that, just in case this is your first time around looking at my templates. So when you invert, you got to be dutiful to the prompt. You have to be talking about houses, otherwise, you're not going to get the thesis point. But here's the ultimate question, right? That we have to ask of the prompt. How do houses construct meaning in the work as a whole? So as we saw with poetry in the short excerpt, I had 2 questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? So we're still doing literary analysis, so we have to ask that question about the construction of meaning. So in answering that question, how do houses construct meaning in the work as a whole, you're going to get at a thesis. So I like to see the answer of that in the very last sentence. So nothing's changing here. So for an introductory paragraph for all FRQs and all expository modes, we're looking for 4 sentences long. So we're going to start with the context and background, flesh that out in those first 3 sentences. Last sentence, how do houses construct meaning in the work as a whole? So I'll give you a number of examples and models on how to do that. And then one of the questions that teachers often ask me is, to list the terms or not to list the terms? 'Tis the question. So we'll take a look at a few introductions, and I'll advise how I situate my students to tackle this particular free response question. So many ways to skin a fish, the compositional fish. So I'll give you my way of doing it. So when you invert, you're going to start with the context, background, hook, or an analogy. I tell my students, don't get cute on this. It's a timed exam, and I don't know. It's an academic paper, so there's really no need to be cute in the beginning. But if you got something catchy, then that's going to earn you some pizzazz points. Then go for it. So you're going to start with the context, background. As always, you want to cop an academic tone, so we would like to see some tier 2 level vocabulary in there. And what I mean by that is just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word. So it's going to be 4 sentences, and then the other thing that we're going to focus on are our sentence constructs to establish our voice rhythm and flow. And in other videos in my YouTube channel, I have a bunch of exercises to teach kids those various sentence constructs so that they can achieve voice rhythm flow in their writing. So check those out as well. So here's one, and we're going to start with the context in the background, focus on the tier 2, focus on the sentence constructs. Last sentence, how does the author use houses to construct meaning in the work as a whole? So that's all I'm going to do here within the confines of this template. Willie, in Death of a Salesman, is unable and unwilling to awaken to witness the nightmare of all of his dreaming, especially his dreams that center upon the literal and figurative home he so desires to make for himself and his family. So you can see here, stay anchored in homes and houses, right? You go outside of that context, you risk not getting a thesis. Having hopes and aspirations is noble, but for men like Willie, they are downright foolish. He deathlessly chases after the phantoms of the American dream and doesn't understand until it's too late that that's exactly what it is, a dream not based in reality. So look at how we get to the construction of meaning in this last sentence. Arthur Miller reminds us of one thing through the symbols that are stored in the Lohman house. The promise of America are a lie. So here's what I tell my students. If the prompt is asking you to focus on houses, homes, that idea, in your thesis statement, you got to say that word, right? So if you're in your thesis statement and you're not talking about, the house, the symbol of the home, then it's risky, right? You're in precarious territory where you might not get the thesis point. So I always tell my students to stay super anchored in the language of the prompt and make sure that language goes into your thesis. So this is a straight up inverted 4 sentences, sentence constructs, tier 2. How does the author construct meaning in the work as a whole through the symbol of houses? Last sentence. So I'll show you again, different text, different students, exact same approach. When it comes to the family unit, boundaries often don't keep others out, they fence you in. In essence, what Troy Maxson needed to do is build a longer family table, not an all-encompassing barrier to safeguard his home. So you see here, talk about the home. As the play progresses, each of the principal characters come to know an absolute truth. Fear and dishonesty is the highest fence one can possibly erect, whether that home be literal or symbolic in nature. Last sentence, get into the terms and the devices, the construction of meaning. In Fences, Wilson weaves this extended metaphor within the context of the family home, along with the motifs of life and baseball as well as blues music. So get into the literary aspects of the text that highlight this idea of the symbolism of the home. So this one does the exact same thing. 4 sentences, sentence constructs, tier 2, end with the thesis so that you have an inverted thesis. Here's another one. New student, different text, exact same approach. Dreams know a secret truth that most humans tend to overlook. Moments of pain are opportunities for growth. See, start with the context, start with the background. It is the nature of some dreams to get crushed, but what fate ushers in is an even better version of the original dream. While all of the principal characters in A Raisin in the Sun have their dreams deferred, what they end up with is a much better thing, a home in which to experience the unconditional love of family. All right, I was a little worried here because this student was very focused on dreams, right? And I was like, get it in, get it in, get it in. So they connected. Now, last sentence, construction of meaning. Use the terms and devices. Hansberry conveys this theme through the symbol of Mama's houseplant and the motif of the home. So every single time when you're in the thesis statement, you have to be anchored in the prompt. Otherwise, you're pretty hard pressed to get the thesis point. So every single one was 4 sentences. Every single one had a good academic tone because of the tier 2 level vocabulary. Each one had pretty good rhythm, voice, flow because of the sentence constructs, and each one inverted. The last sentence answered the question, how does the author construct meaning in the work as a whole through the symbol of homes and houses? So each time done the exact same way. So that's how my students uniformly did it on the exam. And I know some teachers say, but Christian, 4 sentences is going to take forever. This is a timed exam. They have 3 essays to write in 2 hours. How could they possibly do this? In my response to that is, I get them as early as September 7th, and I have them to the first week of May. I have plenty of writing opportunities over the course of the year to practice this. I Bob Ross the hell out of my instruction. I give lots of models and exemplars to my students, just like I'm doing for you. And they see me as the expert writer in the class, writing with them over and over and over and over again, and nothing changes. So if we're doing, poetry, introductions the exact same way. Short stories, same way. Plays, novels, it's all the same thing. So the template never, ever, ever changes. For literature, 99 out of 100 times, students can invert the thesis and come out of the gate like this. It's a solid foundation upon which to write to the rest of the essay. It's a good blazing start. So all 3 of these students are getting some good kudos from the reader. So let's move on to the body paragraphs. And as you've seen in my other videos, we're going to talk about the syllogistic method again. So ultimately what we want our students to do is establish that elusive line of reasoning. And I find that my students, when they become real adept at writing syllogistically, that line of reasoning kind of just happens after a while. It's elusive. It's tough to teach. It's tough to get students to execute this on paper, but this template makes it really possible for them to be able to do it. So let me give a brief overview of what the syllogistic construct is, its history, and then its applicability to composition. So it comes from the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, basically the art of debate. And they would grapple with these ginormous topics like, what is justice, right? If you've ever read Plato's Republic, that's the essential question. The whole book is centered upon that. What is justice? And one man comes to the podium and says, let me tell you what justice is. And he would expound upon a definition of justice. And each definition is cloaked as a syllogistic construct. And then the other men would huddle up, the other philosophers, and say, nah, that's an inadequate definition of justice. And then the next person would go up to the mic and say, here's the most excellent example of what justice is. And it just went on and on and on, Plato's Republic, and they never arrived at a definition of what justice is because it's too subjective and personal. So in terms of our purposes for composition, ultimately, we just want students to be very cogent in their reasoning. So when you argue from premise to conclusion, that's what a syllogism is. So if I say premise number 1, any 38-year-old or older non-felon born in the U.S. can run for the presidency. We nod our heads and say, all right, it's true. It's a law. And if we say in the second premise, James is 42, has no criminal record, and he was born in Rhode Island, then naturally we conclude James can run for the presidency. So that's the line of reasoning that we want our students to have, like lockstep, bulletproof, logical sequencing in their writing. So in terms of what it looks like for FRQ3, nothing really changes from the other FRQs. We're still looking at a first premise that's going to be a statement with a literary focus. The students have to use their terms and devices. The only thing that changes is the second premise, because they don't have a poem in front of them. They don't have an excerpt in front of them. So the textual support is coming from their recall. Like, they have to get into text specificity from recall. How familiar are you with the text, right? Can you get into the nuanced nitty gritty of the text from your recall? And the conclusion is going to be the textual analysis and the links. And I always say this to my students, and I say it to teachers as well. The first premise is a promise. In the conclusion of the syllogism, you got to fulfill your promise. So students often ask me this, teachers as well. Christian, the introduction is 4 sentences long because you're using a template. We get that. Now, when we get into the body paragraphs, you're telling students to go syllogistically with premise, premise, conclusion. That's the whole chemistry of one body paragraph. How many sentences are you looking for? There must be a number, and there is. To have sufficient textual support and analysis, I want my students to shoot for 10 sentences, hard cap at 12. You'll notice that when in FRQ3, when I look at College Board sample papers and when I read the exam, a lot of students just love to get plot heavy on this. And in effect, and I'll do a video on this down the road. In effect, what a lot of students do is only offer forth the second premise. And I say, no. You're not meeting the demands of the assignment. We're not asking for plot analysis. We're asking for literary analysis. So immediately within they don't even have a topic sentence. A lot of these kids, immediately in the opening sentence of the first body paragraph, it's plot. So they love to retell the story, and the floodgates open. And then you have these huge gargantuan paragraphs. So that's what happens when, we position our students to have an opportunity to write plot. They go on and on and on about it. So 10 sentences. You got to make sure you have a first premise up there, though. And then textual support from recall in the conclusion of the syllogism. Make your links echo the thesis, right? So we want to hear about houses in the conclusion. So students often don't know how to begin their body paragraphs. And here's the easiest thing. I tell them, take 3 sentences to set it up. So this is, those of you that have seen my FRQ1 and FRQ2 videos, you're saying, oh my God, this guy's not lying. You do the same thing every time. Yep, take 3 sentences to set up the first premise, because we are, doing literary analysis, which is expository writing. So we have to argue. And the College Board on the synthesis essay for Lang says your argument must be central. They say that repeatedly in the directions. And I say it to my students every time they sit down for an expository paper. Your argument must be central. So I want 3 sentences to make sure that they're arguing. In this way, they're guaranteeing themselves that they will meet the demands of the assignment and write literary analysis and not plot analysis. So sprinkle in the terms and the devices. We want to be talking about houses from start to finish. So get house in there. We know that we have to be talking about symbolism, the symbolism of the house, and work in anything else. So take 3 sentences to set that up. So let's see what this student did using a raisin in the sun. Mama's feeble houseplant symbolizes the home she wishes to build for her family, but also her family's deferred dreams for a better future, which struggle to survive and take root in Chicago's South Side in an era of deep racial divide. So we're anchored in the prompt. We are in terms and devices. We are arguing using our terms and devices. So we got 2 sentences left to flesh that out. Her endless devotion to her small houseplant and her dream of procuring a home signifies her constant care for her family and her attention to its dreams. While every principal character witnesses a radical revision of their initial dream, the plant struggles to stay alive, as is juxtaposed to the struggling survival of the individual dreams and family unit. So we are 3 sentences in. We clearly have a literary argument here. We're using our terms, our devices. We've argued. We're anchored in the prompt. Super duper. 4th sentence begins the second premise, which is the textual support. Now, to establish the line of reasoning, let's ask ourselves, what is the promise of the first premise? We promise to talk about the symbol of the houseplant, the symbol of the home, and the dreams deferred. So all of the textual support needs to be germane to those 3 things. If we bring in anything extraneous, we're probably going to have a logical fallacy. And if we neglect to focus on all 3 of those things, we're going to have a logical fallacy and therefore break our line of reasoning. So let's see where this goes. Growing doggedly in a small pot by the apartment's kitchen window, Mama's plant has spirit despite the fact that this old plant ain't never had enough sunshine or nothing. So usually kids don't quote in FRQ 3 because they don't have a text in front of them. This kid remembered some lines. Cool. Doesn't help them, doesn't hurt them. So we're talking about the house plant. Cool. It's what we were talking about in the first premise. So that's germane. In conjunction with these symbols, the Youngers have struggled to overcome their hardships and setbacks, such as racial prejudice that thwart their growth and social mobility. Mama dreams of owning a house with a small garden, and until the play's conclusion, her plant is as close as she ever got to achieving that dream. In the final moments of the play, Mama picks up her plant and leaves the Southside apartment for the last time, showing that this symbol of perseverance will accompany the family as it faces new challenges in Claiborne Park. So everything is underneath the umbrella concept of that first premise. Do you see? Everything needs to be linked. Everything needs to be germane. If we're not talking about the house plant, if we're not talking about houses, and we're not talking about dreams, we ain't talking about nothing else. Otherwise, we got logical fallacies going on. So I'm out of space on this slide. The rest of the syllogism is coming over to this slide. We further see this idea at play when gruffly Mama very happily tells Walter to leave her alone while she tends to her plant. Walter's persistent pursuit of his father's life insurance money pulls the family apart and disappoints the sentiments of his mother. In stark contrast, which brings about a resolution to the central conflict, Walter sweetly and playfully begins to sing, and Ruth brings Mama the package that Walter had purchased for the home. This is a moment of reconciliation, a cue that the family has remedied their divide, and that they plan to go ahead with Mama's dream of keeping the family united through the purchase of the new home. So you got to see here, you got to stay focused on home, 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 home. That's the whole prompt. So got a lot of support in here. It's pretty thorough. Now we got to get to the conclusion. One more sentence here just before we get to the conclusion. The gardening tools symbolize the resolution as to what is going to happen to the family's dreams. So we're at the conclusion of the syllogism, not the conclusion of the essay, the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. Listen to how this ties back to the first premise and echoes the thesis. So we got to be talking about the prompt in here, right? The thesis statement. Draw it all back. As we see, the biggest dream of any family is their survival and need to flourish and grow together as a united front beneath one common roof. Mama's unwavering devotion to both her plant and family indicate that this dream is going to come true. In the end, all the stuff of dreams is rendered moot. It's a dream of staying together as one being that truly matters. So again, at the end, home, 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 right? You got to go back to the prompt. So we had a literary focus. All the textual support was connected to those literary terms and devices promised in the first premise. We had plenty of support and analysis without going on and on and on. We don't want to blow V8. We don't want to prattle on or go for bird walks. So all of this occurred in 12 sentences. Very tight, very clearly delineated line of reasoning. Everything that was promised in the first premise was discussed in the syllogistic body paragraph in a very neat package. So that's what the syllogistic construct is going to yield for your students once they can successfully manipulate this template. So that's FRQ 3 2001. So here's the kicker though. I said this earlier, I say this in all my videos. You have to Bob Ross your instruction and paint with your students if you want them to write this well. So when I work with teachers in my mastermind, and when I do consulting for districts and departments, I always say that you're the expert writer. Even if you don't think you are, you're the teacher, you are the expert writer. Students need to see your work. So write exemplars and models for them, talk them through it, and show them how these templates work. So there's great reward when you do that. And you might think it's time consuming, but the time you save grading on the back end is well worth it. I would much rather be writing exemplars than grading papers. So that's that. So hopefully you found this to be useful and can use it as a review tool for your students. If you want more information about my templates or even myself and my mastermind classes, then there's my website address there, teachinghowtowrite.com. There's an email address on that webpage too if you want the PowerPoint for this particular writing workshop if you want to use it with your students. All right, so that's it for now. Happy teaching, happy writing, and we'll see you next time. And please subscribe.